My husband's mother arranged a grand dinner in a luxurious restaurant, yet when I arrived, there wasn't a seat for me. She smiled and said, "Maybe a budget place suits you better." But she didn't know, the owner of the restaurant was my friend. And that night, her perfect image began to crumble. I had barely stepped through the golden doors of the restaurant when I noticed it, every seat at the long, lavish table was taken. My husband's mother sat proudly at the head, surrounded by relatives and friends. Crystal glasses sparkled, laughter echoed, and the smell of roasted duck with orange glaze filled the air. Yet not a single chair waited for me. I froze, clutching my small clutch bag tighter, my heels clicking nervously against the marble floor. Where should I sit?" I asked, my voice quiet, but my heart pounding. Her lips curled into a polished smile, the kind she used whenever she wanted to hide a dagger behind it. "Oh, darling," she said sweetly, tilting her head, "perhaps a budget place suits you better." Her words sliced through me with deliberate cruelty. The family chuckled lightly, pretending not to notice. My husband shifted in his seat, staring at his plate, avoiding my eyes. For a moment, my cheeks burned, shame pressing into me like a weight. But then something inside me cracked, no, not cracked, shifted. Instead of tears, a laugh bubbled out of me. A loud, unrestrained laugh that startled even the waiters. Heads turned. My mother-in-law's smile faltered for the first time that evening. Still laughing, I walked straight toward the maitre d'. "Excuse me," I said confidently, "could you please bring me a seat? After all, the owner of this place won't mind." The maitre d' raised his brows, clearly confused. "And why is that, madam?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice, my smile sharper than a blade. "Because the owner is my old college friend," I whispered, letting the words hang in the air like a secret only I could enjoy. The maitre d's eyes widened slightly before he nodded discreetly. "Of course, madam. Please, allow me." He hurried away, and within moments, an elegant chair appeared at the end of the table. Every head turned as he set it down with a flourish, as if announcing royalty. My mother-in-law's eyes narrowed. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed under her breath, her carefully composed facade starting to crack. I sat gracefully, smoothing my dress, and flashed her a serene smile. "Oh, didn't you know? Michael, the owner of this place, and I go way back. We studied together. He always said I had a knack for making people feel at home." As if on cue, a tall man in a tailored navy suit emerged from the kitchen. Michael, his presence commanding yet warm, spotted me instantly and broke into a wide grin. "Anna? Is that you?" he exclaimed, his voice cutting across the table's hum of conversation. I stood to greet him, and he pulled me into a genuine embrace. "It's been too long. You look incredible. How are you? What on earth are you doing here without telling me?" I could feel the room shift. The same relatives who moments earlier avoided my gaze now stared at me with curiosity, some even with envy. My husband's fork clattered against his plate. My mother-in-law's smile had evaporated completely, replaced by a thin, pale line. "I was just invited to a family dinner," I said lightly, but it seems there wasn't much room left for me at the table. Michael frowned, then looked directly at her. "No room for Anna? That's impossible. For her, there is always room in my restaurant." In fact, he clapped his hands, and within seconds, 2 waiters appeared. "Bring her the chef's special tasting menu. And make sure the wine cellar opens tonight for her choosing." The clatter of dishes, the sudden attention, the respect dripping from every waiter's gesture, it was more than just service. It was acknowledgement. And my mother-in-law knew it. She tried to recover, chuckling awkwardly. "Well, I just thought." But her voice trailed off as Michael leaned closer to me. "You must let me show you the new private lounge later. I've been saving it for special guests." The phrase special guest seemed to echo, filling the air with silent judgment. My cheeks didn't flush with embarrassment anymore, they glowed with quiet pride. I looked across the table at my husband, who shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. He hadn't defended me. He hadn't said a word. And in that silence, I learned something. Tonight wasn't just about my mother-in-law's insult. It was about my husband's complicity. I sipped the wine the waiter had poured and let the laughter return to my lips, not the nervous laugh from before, but a calm, deliberate sound. My mother-in-law glared, her hand clutching her crystal glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "Anna," she finally said, her voice cold, "you always seem to surprise us." "Yes," I replied softly, but with meaning only she could hear. "And that's what makes life interesting, isn't it?" Around me, the evening resumed, laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of conversation. But beneath it all was a new tension, a current that couldn't be ignored. She had tried to humiliate me, to cast me out like I was beneath them. Instead, I had risen higher, not with anger, not with shouting, but with presence and unexpected strength. And yet, as I savored the first taste of the chef's creation, I knew this was only the beginning. My mother-in-law would not forgive me for turning her spectacle upside down. She would plot, she would whisper, she would scheme. And my husband? His silence cut deeper than her words ever could. That night, beneath the glittering chandeliers, I decided something for myself. I wouldn't just endure their cruelty anymore. I would learn, observe, and wait. Because revenge, when served at the right time, is more exquisite than any five-star meal. And I had just gotten my first taste. The dinner dragged on, though for me it felt like a stage play I was watching from the front row. I sipped my wine slowly, savoring each glance my mother-in-law threw my way. She couldn't hide her irritation, no matter how tightly she gripped her fork or how brightly she smiled at others. Every time Michael came over to check on me personally, her jaw stiffened. The relatives tried to keep up the conversation, but I noticed how their eyes darted back and forth between us. Some were amused, others clearly uncomfortable. One aunt leaned over to whisper to another, "Did you know Anna knew the owner?" The whispered reply was followed by a surprised gasp. And then there was my husband. He sat like a man chained to his chair, staring at his food, barely speaking. He didn't scold his mother, didn't defend me, didn't even meet my gaze. That silence cut through me more than her petty cruelty. I forced myself to smile, to play along, though inside a storm brewed. I thought back to the years I had spent trying to win his mother's approval, bringing her gifts on holidays, helping organize family gatherings, even biting my tongue during her casual insults. For what? For her to humiliate me openly in front of everyone? And for my husband to pretend he couldn't see it? The waiter brought out my special course, an artful plate of truffle risotto with edible gold leaf. Gasps echoed from the table. Some cousins only had chicken and mashed potatoes, but I sat there with a dish most of them couldn't even pronounce. "Compliments of the chef," the waiter said with a bow. I lifted my fork with steady hands, though inside I was trembling, not from fear, but from the fire igniting in me. I caught my mother-in-law's eye and smiled sweetly. "Delicious," I said after my first bite, "just perfect." Her glass trembled in her hand. And in that moment, I knew, I wasn't going to beg for her approval anymore. No, this was the turning point. From now on, I would stop being the outsider she thought she could toy with. I would become someone she couldn't ignore, someone she couldn't control. The thought gave me strength, and I leaned back in my chair, ready for whatever came next. Because one thing was certain, this war had only just begun. When dessert was served, I noticed how the room itself seemed to shift. The table had been filled with chatter earlier, but now every word was careful, controlled. My mother-in-law's attempt to embarrass me had turned against her, and the others sensed it. People who once politely ignored me now glanced at me with curiosity, maybe even with respect. Michael returned once more, carrying a delicate tray of macarons himself, though waiters were everywhere. He set it down in front of me and smiled warmly. "Only the best for you, Anna. Try the pistachio, it's a new recipe." I thanked him, my voice calm, though inside I was glowing. He gave a small nod to the rest of the table before leaving. But the message had been sent. I wasn't just the daughter-in-law anymore, I was someone who mattered. My mother-in-law cleared her throat. "Well," she began, her tone sharp but masked with a smile, How lovely that you have old acquaintances. Not just acquaintances, I corrected softly. Friends. Real friends stay with you, even after years apart. I let the words sink in, aware of the sting they carried. Across the table, my husband's face reddened, but he said nothing. His silence grew heavier by the minute. I wondered, was it shame that kept him quiet, or fear of his mother? Either way, the realization cut into me. I studied him for a moment longer, then looked away. I couldn't rely on him to protect me, not now, not ever. The truth was dawning painfully clear: if I wanted dignity, if I wanted respect, I'd have to claim it myself. When the dinner finally ended, guests began standing, gathering coats and purses. My mother-in-law forced a final smile for appearance's sake. Thank you all for coming. Such a beautiful evening, wasn't it? I rose gracefully, sliding my chair back. Yes, I replied, keeping my voice steady. An unforgettable evening. She caught my eye, and for the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty in hers. She knew I wouldn't bow my head anymore. She had underestimated me, and she hated realizing it. As I left the restaurant, stepping out into the crisp night air, I felt something new settle in my chest. It wasn't just pride, it was resolve. Tonight had shown me who I was in their eyes. Now, I would decide who I would become in my own. The quiet laughter of the family faded behind me, but in my heart, another sound grew louder, the steady rhythm of determination. This wasn't the end. It was the very beginning. The days after that dinner felt strangely heavy, like the air in our home had thickened. My husband and I barely spoke. He came home late, left early, and when we did cross paths, his words were clipped, practical, lifeless. It was as though he hoped silence would erase the memory of that evening. But silence only sharpened it. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind: his mother's smile, her cruel words, his refusal to defend me. For years, I had convinced myself that she would come around, that if I just tried harder, she'd finally see me as part of the family. But after that night, the illusion shattered. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way she called every weekend but spoke to my husband as if I wasn't even in the room. The way she made small jokes about my job not being as important, or about how I didn't know the proper way to host. The way he never corrected her, never once stood by me. One evening, as I folded laundry, I whispered to myself, I've been playing their game too long. The thought startled me, but it also felt right. Because what had all my efforts earned me? A seatless table, a public insult, and a husband too cowardly to speak. I decided something then: I wouldn't beg for respect anymore. I would earn it on my own terms. And if that meant shaking the ground beneath their feet, so be it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, my mother-in-law invited the whole family for brunch at her house. Her tone on the phone was sweet, almost too sweet, but I could sense the edge in it. She wanted to reclaim her power, to prove the restaurant had been nothing more than a fluke. I accepted immediately. The morning of the brunch, I dressed carefully. Not overdressed, not flashy, but deliberate. A navy blue dress, pearl earrings, and a touch of red lipstick, just enough to signal quiet confidence. As I fastened the clasp on my necklace, I caught my own reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked different now. Sharper. Stronger. When we arrived, the house buzzed with relatives. Laughter, clinking dishes, children running through the halls. My mother-in-law floated in the center of it all, orchestrating everything with her usual air of authority. When she saw me, her smile was polite, but her eyes flickered with something else: testing, probing, daring me to falter. "Anna, so glad you could join us," she said smoothly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied with the same brightness. But underneath, my heart beat steadily, calmly, like a drum keeping time for a march I had already started. As the meal unfolded, I observed everything. The way she leaned into certain cousins, the way she dropped little comments designed to belittle me in subtle ways, the way my husband pretended not to notice. I said little, but I listened. I was no longer trying to fit into their circle, I was studying it, like a chessboard. And then came the moment that shifted everything. She raised her glass and said, "Family is about tradition, about keeping standards alive." Not everyone understands that, but those of us who do, we carry the weight. The table murmured in agreement. All eyes flicked briefly toward me. She had aimed her dart, and everyone knew it. I smiled, lifted my own glass, and said softly but clearly, "Tradition is beautiful, when it doesn't suffocate those who don't fit into its mold." The silence that followed was sharper than any knife. My husband stiffened. My mother-in-law's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a thin line. She hadn't expected me to answer, much less to challenge her. And in that silence, I felt the truth settle over me like a cloak. There was no going back. Whatever came next, I had crossed a line. And I didn't regret it. Because this was the point of no return. The brunch ended, but the silence it left behind echoed louder than the laughter that had filled the rooms. On the drive home, my husband gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Why did you say that?" he muttered finally, his eyes fixed on the road. "Because it needed to be said," I replied, my voice calm, though inside my chest a storm was swirling. "You embarrassed her," he snapped. I turned to him slowly, studying his face. Did I embarrass her, or did I just refuse to let her embarrass me again? His lips pressed into a thin line, and he said nothing more. But his silence told me everything. It was her dignity he worried about, not mine. That night, while he slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. For years, I had carried the weight of his family's judgment, hoping that if I was patient enough, kind enough, forgiving enough, they would accept me. But now I saw it clearly, they never would. To them, I would always be the outsider. And perhaps worse, in my husband's eyes, I was someone to be managed, silenced, kept from stirring the waters. That realization burned hotter than any insult his mother could throw. The following week, invitations arrived for another family event, an anniversary celebration for his parents. A grand affair, of course, with more guests, more pomp, more opportunities for his mother to parade her perfect family image. When I read the invitation, I almost laughed. They truly believed I would show up meek and obedient, ready to play my role again. But I had already decided, I would not walk into that evening unprepared. So, I began to plan. Quietly, carefully. I didn't need to shout or start fights. That wasn't my way. My revenge would be quieter, sharper, more lasting. I started by gathering information. I remembered conversations, offhand comments she had made about finances, about the charities she supported, about keeping up appearances. I remembered how often she spoke of her reputation, how much she cared about being admired in her circle. That was her weakness. Not money, not even power, reputation. And reputation, I knew, could be shattered without a single raised voice. One evening, as I sat with a notebook in hand, jotting down details, a realization struck me. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed to reveal her, to let her own actions speak louder than the perfect image she painted. The thought gave me a calm satisfaction. I wasn't plotting anger, but justice. A way to make her see what it felt like to stand exposed, the way she had left me at that restaurant. As I closed the notebook, I whispered to myself, this time, I'll choose the table. And she won't have a seat. The anniversary celebration arrived faster than I expected. The venue was lavish, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing softly in the corner, and rows of tables draped in white linen. Guests arrived in gowns and suits, eager to congratulate the perfect couple on their many years together. My mother-in-law moved through the crowd like a queen at court, smiling graciously, accepting compliments, and making sure everyone noticed her diamonds. My father-in-law stayed quietly at her side, nodding, though his eyes seemed distant. When my husband and I arrived, I felt every gaze flicker toward us. Whispers traveled quickly. The memory of the restaurant incident had clearly spread further than she would have liked. My mother-in-law greeted me with her usual polished smile. "Anna," she said smoothly, "I trust you'll enjoy yourself tonight. Try to, stay out of trouble." I met her gaze without blinking. Of course, I answered with equal sweetness. I wouldn't dream of spoiling such an important evening. But inside, my pulse beat steadily. Tonight wasn't about shouting matches or cutting words, it was about truth. And I had quietly prepared for it. As the evening unfolded, I moved gracefully through conversations, listening more than speaking. People talked freely when they thought you were harmless. I heard whispers about donations promised but never delivered, about favors she traded for influence in her social circles, about how her generosity often came with hidden strings. At one point, a cousin leaned close and whispered, "You know, she told us you were difficult. That you didn't know how to behave in polite society." I smiled gently. Did she now? Well, I suppose everyone is entitled to their version of the story. But the cousin's raised eyebrows told me the seeds of doubt were already planted. Later, when it was time for speeches, I watched as my mother-in-law took the stage, glowing under the spotlight. She spoke of family, tradition, loyalty, and respect. Each word was chosen carefully, painting the picture of a matriarch who held everything together. I clapped politely, but my mind was clear, her speech was the mask. And masks always crack. By the end of the night, I had gathered more than whispers, I had gathered witnesses. People who were beginning to notice the cracks themselves. All it would take was the right moment, and her perfect image would falter. And I would be ready. The moment came sooner than I expected. After the speeches, the host announced a surprise, a slideshow of the family through the years. Photos flickered across the screen, holidays, weddings, vacations. Smiling faces, carefully chosen moments. Then a picture appeared of the restaurant dinner from weeks ago. My mother-in-law had arranged for a cousin to capture the evening. There she was at the head of the table, smiling radiantly, surrounded by family. And me? Nowhere in sight. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. I felt the sting, but instead of shrinking, I stood. My heels clicked against the floor as I walked toward the front. Calm, steady. Funny thing about that evening, I said, my voice carrying across the room. There actually was one more guest that night. Me. Only, there wasn't a seat. Gasps echoed. My mother-in-law stiffened, her face paling beneath her makeup. And do you know who made sure I had a place? I continued, glancing toward Michael, who had come as a guest this evening as well. The owner of the restaurant. An old friend who remembered kindness, even when others forgot it. Michael gave a small nod of acknowledgement, confirming my words. The room went silent. The mask my mother-in-law wore so carefully cracked in front of everyone. Her laugh was brittle. Oh, darling, you're exaggerating. It was a misunderstanding. But the whispers had already started. Guests exchanged glances, brows furrowed. The image she had built with such care had been pierced, not with shouting, not with anger, but with truth. I stepped back, calm and collected. The damage was done. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. The silence after my words was heavier than any argument could have been. Eyes that once admired her now studied her with suspicion. A few guests leaned close, whispering, and I caught fragments. She did that to her? I always wondered. How cruel. My mother-in-law tried to recover. She lifted her glass and forced a laugh. Family dinners can be chaotic, can't they? But we mustn't dwell on small mishaps, tonight is about love. Her voice wavered. The confident matriarch was slipping. I didn't speak again, I didn't need to. The truth had already spread through the room like spilled wine, staining her perfect image. Michael's presence only sealed it. Everyone knew my story wasn't just a bitter tale, but fact. My husband sat frozen beside me, his face pale. He avoided my eyes, as though looking at me would force him to acknowledge what his silence had cost. The celebration carried on, but it wasn't the same. Laughter was quieter, glances sharper. My mother-in-law smiled too much, her gestures exaggerated, desperate to pull the attention back. But it was too late. The crack had been revealed, and no amount of sparkle could hide it. As the night ended, I felt no triumph, no gloating, just a calm certainty. She had taken my seat once, thinking she could erase me. But tonight, I had shown her that I wasn't invisible. And in the silence that lingered between us as we left the hall, I knew she would never forget it. The ride home was silent. My husband drove with his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the road. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of city lights. For once, I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence. It wasn't my silence to break. When we arrived home, he finally spoke. "Did you have to do that? In front of everyone?" I turned to him slowly. "Did I have to?" "No. I chose to." "Because you didn't." He flinched, but said nothing more. He went upstairs, and I stayed behind in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. My reflection in the window caught my eye, steady, calm, unflinching. I barely recognized the woman I saw, and yet, she felt more like me than I had in years. The next morning, the calls began. Relatives reached out, some quietly praising me, others asking if the story was true. I didn't embellish, I didn't add drama. I simply told the truth. And the truth was enough. By the end of the week, the whispers around my mother-in-law had grown louder. Her reputation, so carefully polished, now carried a stain. She still held her head high in public, but the gleam of untouchable authority was gone. People now saw the woman behind the mask. As for me, I stopped waiting for her approval. I stopped shrinking myself to fit at her table. I created my own space, my own dignity, one she could never take away. The sweetest part of revenge wasn't the whispers or the cracks in her reputation, it was the freedom I felt. The weight I had carried for years was gone. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a book in hand, I realized I didn't need her to like me, or even to respect me. What I needed was to respect myself. And in that quiet moment, I knew, I had already won.